So 2020 has been a little bit strange. That's a severe understatement. For example, Apple's usual September iPhone event seems nowhere to be found. Rather, what we're looking at now is a large October event, absolutely jam-packed with a ton of stuff. Today, we're going to talk about what you should expect. All right, let's quit messing around here. Here is a list of everything that we're expecting at the October event, or if not at the event itself, somewhere in that time frame. Are you ready? A 5.4-inch iPhone 12, 6.1-inch iPhone 12 Plus, 6.1-inch iPhone 12 Pro, a 6.7-inch iPhone 12 Pro, Apple Silicon 12-inch MacBook, Apple Silicon 13-inch MacBook Pro, AirTags 10.8-inch iPad Air, Apple Watch Series 6, HomePod Mini, 16-inch MacBook Pro Intel refresh, AirPods Studio over-ear headphones, and AirPower. Wow! That list, by the way, was in order of likelihood. So the 4 iPhone models are pretty much guaranteed at this point. The 12-inch MacBook and the 13-inch MacBook Pro are seeming increasingly likely. We'll talk about those more, don't worry. AirTags seem like an obvious choice given that we've heard about them for months and months, and we have some really concrete leaks about that. And the Apple Watch Series 6 and the 10.8-inch iPad Air are apparently coming as soon as Tuesday, September 8th. We're not going to go into too much detail about the Apple Watch and the iPad because they're coming so soon, probably a day or two after this video goes live, so be subscribed. I'll have a dedicated video once those products are actually available. As for the other stuff, it's a little bit less clear. We're not really so sure about HomePod Mini or HomePod SE or whatever it might be called. We don't know 100% if that's an actual thing. Same thing with AirPower. We've heard rumors that it's making a comeback, but we don't know a whole lot about the time frame for that. So some people have suggested that it could come in October, potentially as an accessory launched with iPhone 12, but some people aren't so sure about that, so I'm not really comfortable making a prediction on that one. And as for AirPods Studio, we've been hearing about those for a little while now. We've got some pretty concrete details. Komiya says that they'll feature a beefed up H1X chip, hand gestures, active noise canceling, ear detection, lots of really nice features, but we're not super clear about the launch timeline. A lot of sources are saying October, but Apple has been known to have products that are ready and then just kind of sit on them for a while until they find a window. So that could come later. As for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, I think there is bound to be an Intel refresh this year. Not Apple Silicon, that's going to be coming later, 2021 or even 2022. But we have not gone a year without having a MacBook Pro refresh ever since its existence 14 years ago. So at some point in 2020, the 16-inch MacBook Pro will get updated, most likely with 10th generation H-series chips, which have been available for a little while now, and probably AMD's Big Navi graphics, which are slated to come out in early October. It's probably going to be a pretty mild refresh, so don't expect too much, and we'll have to wait and see what it looks like before we can recommend buying it or waiting for Apple Silicon. But now let's dig into the meat of the October event. iPhone 12 series and MacBooks with Apple Silicon. There's a lot that we already know about the iPhone 12 series, so I'm not going to bore you by telling you everything you already know. We'll just do a highlight reel. The big things are a new squared-off design with thinner bezels, OLED on all models, small form factor 5.4-inch entry-level model, then 2 6.1-inch models, and a big super mega 6.7-inch iPhone 12 Pro Max. LiDAR will be on the Pro models, potentially on the non-Pro as well. We're also expecting 240 FPS 4K slow motion on the higher-end models, improved battery life, and much greater performance. Also, hopefully, ProMotion on the Pro models. I'm really crossing my fingers, guys. Even though some of the features that we've been hoping for, like people who thought that this year would get rid of the notch, I think that this is shaping up to be a pretty solid update and one that I'm definitely excited to try out. Look, I'm gonna be honest, a lot of people have been disappointed when reports have said the notch isn't gonna get smaller. Frankly, I don't care about the size of the notch. If it's a couple millimeters less wide, that doesn't make a difference to me. I'll be excited if and when the notch is gone completely, but apart from that, I really don't care how big it is. As for the rest of the iPhone 12, people are disappointed that ProMotion is having issues, that the new design might not be as radical as some were hoping. But here's the thing. Under normal circumstances, I could understand why you might be a little bit disappointed, but from the unprecedented amount of information and leaks that we've had this year, it's been pretty clear to see that Apple is really trying and really struggling with this year's iPhone. I mean, we are weeks away from this event, and they're still trying to figure out if they can get ProMotion working. They're still having issues with the lesser OLED displays on the non-Pro models. Even like 2 weeks ago, they were having issues with that. So Apple is really crunching hard to try and get these phones in, and I can understand in today's, shall we say, tough times? Is that how we're gonna phrase it now? The current world situation, it's understandable. All right, so let's move on to the less discussed and I know to you guys probably more interesting part of this event, Apple Silicon MacBooks. Now up to this point, I've been a little bit hesitant to talk specific details about these Apple Silicon MacBooks, but I've talked to some sources, we've got some leaks, and I'm ready to make some predictions. All right, so the first thing that we'll talk about is the rumored 12-inch Apple Silicon MacBook. This is something that we've been pondering for a couple of months. I have a video from a while back where we talked about this particular model, but this one I think is actually pretty interesting. So you may remember the 12-inch Intel MacBook that was arguably pretty short-lived. It was introduced in 2015 and the last model came out in 2017 and then it got discontinued last July. It was a bit of a mess, right? It was an interesting design, you know, thin, light, small, compact notebook, but it had the butterfly keyboard. It introduced the butterfly keyboard, which everyone hated. It had a ton of reliability problems, and the Intel Core M processors were just totally, hopelessly inadequate. Now though, with Apple Silicon, this idea has a really interesting new future because we've already seen with the likes of iPad Pro that you can have a thin, light device that's also like usable and powerful. And with Apple's technology right now, it should be a pretty easy switch. It's basically an iPad that runs macOS and is shaped like a MacBook. So what exactly are we expecting from this MacBook? Well, it's nothing too spectacular or groundbreaking. It's basically going to feature an A14X based processor, not an A14X itself. 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256, 512 gigabyte or 1 terabyte SSD options, Apple designed GPU that we don't know a whole lot about, up to 15 or 20 hours of battery life, which is incredible, and hopefully a starting price of either $799 or $849. That is a tasty little notebook. Obviously the specs aren't super crazy. 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabyte SSD, and then, you know, whatever Apple Silicon processor that they decide will be the entry level for the Mac. However, the two things that are unbelievable about this are that rumored price point, $799 or $849, which would be the cheapest MacBook that has ever been made, and 15 to 20 hours of battery life. That would be absolutely ludicrous. Now, the only thing that does stand in the way of me being just completely over the moon about the idea of this MacBook is that it might feature a 4th generation, like revived butterfly keyboard. I talked about that a little while ago. We're not 100% sure about that, but that would definitely be a bummer. Although, to be perfectly honest, if they can fix the reliability issues with the butterfly keyboard for this MacBook, at that price point with that battery life, I could live with that. Now let's talk a little bit more about that Apple Silicon processor. So a couple of weeks ago, I made a video where we dissected, using math, basically what we could expect for a very limited slice of insight into the performance of an A14X hypothetical chip. Now I should note, before we talk about the performance, that everyone needs to stop saying that these Macs are gonna have an A14X. Every single news site is saying this. Folks, that's not how this works, okay? A14X is what we were predicting for the next generation iPad Pro. The iPad Pro is not coming in October. It's probably going to come in 2021. So we're probably not even going to see a chip that is branded A14X this year at all. So why would they put it in a MacBook? Why would they make the MacBook chip first and then put it in an iPad later. That's stupid. Apple's not going to mix up these brand names. A means iPhone and iPad. You don't see them putting an Apple Watch chip in an iPhone SE, right? So why would they put an iPad chip in a MacBook? Even if A14X ends up being very, very similar to what we are seeing in this upcoming Apple Silicon MacBook, they will not call it an A14X. That would be ridiculous. What we do know is that the entry-level Mac chip is probably going to be very similar to the A14X. That's why I'm saying A14X based. We don't know the name, but we just know it's going to be similar. Now that chip is supposed to be quite a bit more powerful than the A12X and A12Z. We're looking at a 12-core chip design with 8 high-performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, which would lead to some pretty tasty performance gains. However, for those of you who are expecting Apple Silicon to bring immediate and radical design changes, don't get your hopes up. From what I'm hearing, this Apple Silicon 12-inch MacBook is going to look very similar to the Intel 12-inch MacBook, but with thinner bezels and probably a slightly reworked keyboard. Don't expect a huge radical design change. This should be a pretty interesting product, even if the design isn't super different. Now, the next slightly more controversial rumor is that there's going to be a 13-inch Apple Silicon MacBook Pro that's also unveiled at this event. This one's interesting. It's got some real potential, and it also has some red flags. First of all, the configurations should be pretty similar to what we have right now. So an Apple Silicon processor, 8, 16, or 32 gigabytes of RAM, 256, 512 gigabytes, or 1 terabyte SSDs, an Apple GPU, up to 15 hours of battery life, and most interestingly, a starting price of $1,100, and retaining the same cooling design as the Intel MacBook Pro. Now, what stands out to me about that is the notion that Apple could keep the cooling design. A lot of us have kind of assumed that, at least on the entry-level stuff, Apple wouldn't need active cooling anymore. So this could suggest one of two things. Either one, this is going to be a ridiculously cool running MacBook, or two, they're keeping the fan because they're adding more performance. Possible that that 12-core processor could be destined for the MacBook Pro, while an 8-core version that's a little bit less powerful and runs a little bit cooler could be destined for the 12-inch, which would have a fanless design. So one thing that we've been wondering about for a while now, especially as it pertains to higher-end Apple Silicon Macs like the 16-inch MacBook Pro or the iMac, is what they would do about graphics. We're pretty sure that Apple is pretty much done with AMD. They're not going to be keeping AMD GPUs in their Apple Silicon Macs. Well, apparently Apple will be using their own custom Apple-designed dedicated GPUs built on a 5nm process starting in 2021. This is excellent news because it means that we now have a path forward to updating higher-end Macs with Apple Silicon without having to rely solely on SoCs. So this year's October event is looking jam-packed. That makes sense, actually, when you consider that under normal circumstances, we would potentially expect a September Apple Watch and iPhone event, and then a later October Mac and iPad event. So basically what we're doing this year is averaging the date in early October and kind of combining those two events. On the downside, we have to wait longer for iPhones, but on the upside, that is going to be one heck of an event. So if you're as excited as I am to see what exactly happens, make sure you're subscribed here on the channel, and don't forget to follow me on Twitch because that's where I'll be streaming coverage of the October event. So the link for that is in the description. As usual, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at Luke Miani, and you can check out my subreddit, which is linked in the description below. And with that, I will see you all in the next video.